What's going on, guys? We're talking college football in the Deep South, where college football is king and the battle cry is War Eagle. We're only 1 day away from A-Day, the annual spring game at Auburn University this coming weekend. That game will be taking place on Saturday at 3 o'clock. I want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang. Let's go ahead and get the comment section active as we always do. YouTubers, War Eagle. Now, you know, when you think about seasons and you think about the outcomes, that you know, somewhere in there is a defining moment that, you know, kind of gauges how the season turns out, how we feel about that season, how that season is going to turn out. So just real quick, just to do a little, I'm going to give you mine for the Gus Malzahn era. Some games or some plays or some moments that I thought, say, between 2013 and now, that have kind of shaped those seasons, that kind of was the turning point of those particular seasons. Okay, so when I look back to 2013, there were a couple of moments in there. You're talking about the LSU game. In the second half, I think Auburn played incredible, kind of giving a glimpse as to how the run-pass option was going to work long-term. I think that was a game that Gus Malzahn really started to see the skill set of Trey Mason and Nick Marshall and how they were going to perform the rest of that season. But my turning point to where I thought Auburn could really make some noise as national contenders was the trip to Kyle Field. Auburn was facing Johnny Manziel, who I think was one of the most explosive players college football-wise. It was very hard to stop Johnny Manziel and the Chad Evans combination. I mean, he could just throw it up for grabs, and Chad Evans was going to find it. Johnny Manziel was actually absolutely incredible at running the football, and he was very creative in how he can spot receivers off balance on the run. He just was a phenomenal athlete at the collegiate level. You know, when I think about this, I think Auburn's fight, Auburn's ability in a hostile environment, taking on a team that had defeated them 63-21 and turning that into a very monumental victory in which Nick Marshall's skill set continued to blossom. I think that was the turning point of the 2013 season. I think that was the point where I started to believe that Auburn could make a run, and therefore, after that, moving forward to big wins over Alabama and seconds away from winning the national championship in 2013. But I think that Texas A&M was the game that had me believing that Auburn had a shot at contending for something. Okay. All right, so we move on to 2014. You know, Auburn hoping to redeem themselves from the missed opportunity in the national championship game against Florida State. The game for me that let me know that Auburn was in a little bit of trouble was the game against Mississippi State. I mean, every mistake possible made in that game, still having a shot late, but still surrendering that game 38-23. I think that was the beginning of just a series of very, very poorly played games, especially on defense. Auburn struggled mightily down the stretch in 2014 on defense, including surrendering 55 points to the University of Alabama, having scored 44 points themselves. The offense, was doing pretty awesome, you know, but just didn't have that defense to complement. But I think that game against Mississippi State was the one that started the downhill nature of that season. So we look over to 2015. We're thinking that Jeremy Johnson could possibly be a Heisman candidate. The game in this season that let me know that we were in deep trouble, actually it was two games that let me know that we were in deep trouble. Number one was the overtime victory over Jacksonville State. As a matter of fact, Auburn had to have a miracle run by Peyton Barber to get into overtime, and then, of course, being able to win that game in overtime was somewhat of a sigh of relief, because you're thinking, well, hell, at least you didn't lose to your in-state foe, Jacksonville State. That would have been catastrophic if Auburn would have lost that game. Oh, man, that would have been bad. But anyway, the next week, though, facing LSU with hopes of, kind of salvage, getting everything back in the road, because we feel like, sometimes you can get caught slipping, for lack of a better way of putting it, against an FCS opponent. However, in the LSU game, that's when we really found out that Jeremy Johnson was just not ready for the big stage and never would be. In that game, there was a particular play where Jeremy Johnson literally threw the ball behind his head. And it just started, and Leonard Fournette was just running rampant on Auburn's defense. Probably one of the most insanely embarrassing games in Auburn history, recent history anyway. That game against LSU really let me know that this team was not ready to fit the bill of being a top 10 team long term, was not going to have a chance to win the SEC West, and, we see how that season turned out with a trip to the Birmingham Bowl, oddly enough, and, just really, really not the outcome you want for a, considering that you're, at least in the upper tier of the SEC, you have no business playing in the Birmingham Bowl. Okay, so fast forward to 2016. This year was a little interesting for me because, you got Shaun White as the quarterback, John Franklin III on the recruiting trail. They're thinking that John Franklin III might be the savior, might be the next Nick Marshall. But John Franklin III made an appearance on Last Chance U, which I think turned out to really hurt his career because a lot of things perception-wise took place in Last Chance U that I just knew. I knew this guy was not going to be the starter for Auburn if he even played. One thing I noticed is that I think his recruitment was a little irresponsible. I think Rhett Lashley caught John Franklin on a very good night. They were playing against a horrible team, and John Franklin looked like a world beater that day. But when I really started to dissect, I understood why Jimbo Fisher did not trust John Franklin as his quarterback. He just wasn't fit to lead a team. He had too much of that I mentality. Okay, so the game that I think was the turning point of that season for me was the Vanderbilt game, because Auburn was one of the hottest teams in America. Going into the Vanderbilt game, one, we didn't know until the game actually started that Shaun White was hurt. And two, Cameron Petway wound up going down. So you're talking two players that were very instrumental in leading this run. And that Vanderbilt game pretty much solidified where Auburn was going to go moving forward. Of course, the loss to Georgia the next week, and then a couple of weeks later not having a chance because of offensive production against Alabama. And we see where that season went. 2016 ended with a embarrassing loss to Oklahoma. The only reason why the score was 35-19, Auburn actually scored late in that game to make it look a little bit better score-wise than it actually was. So fast forward to 2017, what game do I think was the most important one and the turning point of that year? I think the Alabama game was the turning point, even though it was late in the season. But although Auburn defeated Alabama, it was a very costly defeat because Auburn lost Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon Johnson literally carried the team on his shoulders en route to wins over number one teams, Georgia and Alabama. You had to think if Kerry, as hot as he was and as he found his rhythm, Auburn was headed towards another SEC championship win. But with the loss of Kerryon Johnson, I think Auburn had some answers, but Auburn just didn't put forth the effort to put forth, another combination of running backs to have a chance against Georgia. Kerryon Johnson fumbles the ball late against Georgia. Also, this is in the SEC championship now. And I think in that game, the SEC championship game, Georgia had a field goal block, which pretty much ended, in my opinion, any hope that Auburn had in winning that game. And then, of course, going on to lose to UCF 34-27, furthering UCF's "We Are the Champions" cause and ending 2017 season. Last but not least, 2018 brought a lot of promise. Huge win over Washington to start the season off, which was countered by an early loss to LSU, and then just a abysmal stretch in the SEC, which included 3 consecutive SEC games that were played at 12 o'clock p.m. You don't play that early, but 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Central Time. Included in one of those games, I think, was the pivotal point of the season. We're talking in the third quarter, I think. I can't quite remember. In the third quarter, I think, Kellen Mond dropped back, passed the football, and he threw very errantly to Noah Igbenogany, who was in perfect position to make the interception, and he did. Now, at the time, no one in that stadium could have thought that this would have led to a victory. They're like, oh, okay, another good play by the defense. Because usually what happens is when Auburn does something spectacular on the defense, the offense really doesn't do anything with it. All right, so I think this interception by Noah Igbenogany changed the scope of the 2018 season, and it just gave Auburn some hope going into next week against Georgia, ranked number 24, having a chance in the first half. Just kind of couldn't get things going offensively in the second half against Georgia, even having a late interception by Jamel Dean. And the fight was back after losing to Texas A&M. There was some hope, there was some heartbeat for the Auburn Tigers. I think that interception by Noah Igbenogany changed the scope. Auburn went on to lose to Alabama, but the game was competitive. You felt good about it, at least in the first half. And they have the best receivers. Auburn kind of collapsed in the second half, but you felt bad, but you're like, okay, at least we moved the ball. At least we did something. And then to cap it off with a huge win over Purdue, and the return of Derrick Brown, which gives reason for so much excitement going into the 2019 season. I call it casual optimism, but I think Auburn has a chance to be a very good football team this season. Now, let me know in the comment section what games or what moments do you think have, kind of shaped the scopes of Gus Malzahn era seasons. This was just my opinion. Once again, it's K-Stu the GOAT for Vernon Speak Sports, mostly talking about Auburn football. Subscribe to my channel. Get in the comment section, tell your friends about this thing. War Eagle.